First of all, I do have to apologize on two issues. First of all, I'm not going to talk about taxes, but quite on the contrary, on welfare spending, so the flip side. And second, I'm not going to talk about history, but about current issues and the impact of religion, or I should better say, of of Christian denominations on the size and the structure of the welfare state. So, some motivation beforehand. In 2001, Italian economist Alberto Alesina asked a famous question titled, "Why doesn't the United States have a European-style welfare state?" And he argues, well, there are some economic conditions that we typically refer to as being relevant for the size of the welfare state, but these are all more or less the same in industrialized countries. Nevertheless, the United States have a much different welfare state than, let's say, Sweden, for example. Now, why is this the case? His answer and the answer with his colleagues was the main reason is ethnic heterogeneity. The United States is more or less a melting pot of different ethnicities, whereas Sweden, for example, is a very ethnic homogenetic society, and therefore in Sweden we have more redistribution than in the United States. We are currently working on this topic, and I'm not so sure whether this argument really holds true. I think there are other differences that can explain the difference between American-style welfare states and European-style or kind of European-style welfare states. So much for the motivation. So all developed countries face the same economic and social challenges: industrialization, globalization, demographic change. However, no uniform Western welfare state evolves, neither in the level, which we typically operationalize with the social expenditure ratio, so the ratio of social expenditures to GDP in a country, nor the scope of the welfare state. Is it mainly for poverty relief, or is the scope mainly social inclusion, or do we have a welfare state in order to correct market failure? And same holds true for the structure as well. So do we mainly rely on cash benefits, or are there mainly transfers in kind in this welfare state? I will come back to the second point just in a minute. And the third argument that I would like to mention is that the so-called established regime classifications, the most well-known regime classification comes from Esping Andersen. They help to describe different welfare state arrangements in some way, but they are unable to explain the underlying reasons for these differences. So why do we have these different welfare states? And to come back to Alesina, I forgot this argument again. He also argued that the reason for the different welfare states between USA and Sweden cannot be different cultural backgrounds, because he says both Americans and Swedes, they share the same Protestant cultural background. Now, this argument was picked up by a German political scientist, Philipp Mano. He worked at that time in Cologne, and I think he's now a professor for political science in Bremen. And he says we can get a closer idea of why we have so different and long-lasting differences between the welfare states when we take a closer look at the denominational culture of each of these countries. And he distinguishes for the industrialized world three denominational clusters. The first one is the Lutheran tradition, which we take as an example for the established church tradition. Then the Free Protestant tradition, which relies mainly on Calvinist traditions or the Dissentist tradition, and of course the Roman Catholic tradition. And with this context, with this model in mind, we have at least some first ideas why there should be or there can be a long-lasting difference in welfare state arrangements in industrialized Western countries. So, before I start with our own empirical work on this issue, I first want to address the question, is this really the case that welfare states differ long-lasting between these countries? And the first thing that we did was we simply calculated the coefficient of variance concerning the level of welfare spending, the social expenditure ratio with respect to several OECD countries. And if we had a convergence on a specific kind of welfare state, then this line here should have a negative slope, statistically significant negative slope. And what we can see here is that this is not the case. Yeah? So the coefficient of variation more or less stays the same over time. We started in 1995 and expanded it to 2018. We did this also in a regression calculation. Now, if we had convergence in the proper sense, then this coefficient should be negative and statistically significant. We see it is negative, but it is not statistically significant, so there is no significant approaches on different welfare states concerning the level of the welfare state. Same holds true for the structure of welfare spending, and the structure of welfare spending is calculated by the in-kind to cash ratio. So we looked at how much a country spends of in-kind social services compared to the number of cash benefits that this country gives to its citizens. And here we can see that there is no convergence, but rather a divergence. So countries get more or less unequal. Same holds true when we make a regression on this issue. Again, this coefficient should be negative. It is not, it is positive, and it's statistically not significant. So what we can see is that the differences in size and in structure of the welfare state is rather stable over time. So there is no convergence to a unique, let's say, industrialized welfare state whatsoever. So we took up the idea of Philip Mano and asked ourselves what the underlying reasons might be why there should be some kind of differences between these welfare states. I do not want to call this hypothesis. It's more or less a, well, more or less guessed estimate or an a priori expectation. Concerning the level, the social expenditure ratio of the different welfare states, we would argue that in the Roman Catholic tradition, we would expect a rather high level of social welfare spending. Why is this the case? First of all, we have this Catholic social teaching, the social teaching of the Roman Catholic Church, which has a very, very long tradition. It started in the 19th century. It had its predecessors going back to the Middle Ages. And it is said that, first of all, it is the duty, the obligation of every Christian to help the poor. Whether they are deserving poor or undeserving poor does not matter that much than in other denominations, and we have a very strict market skepticism. So the market is not able to overcome this dire situation that came up during the times of industrialization. So there must be other institutions beside the market to cope with this problem of distribution and a fair distribution of income and wealth in society. Now, when we take a look at the Lutheran or the established church variety, we made here a question mark. We are not so sure what is the attitude of the Lutheran Church concerning the level of social expenditure. On the one hand, we have these classical Protestant work ethics that Max Weber addresses intensively in his works. But on the other hand, especially, and this is special for the Lutheran or the established church's doctrine, we have this two kingdoms doctrine. So it is more or less the task of the state to take care for the impoverished in society. Yeah? So we have two different and distinct tasks in society, the task of the church and the task of the state, and redistribution, organizing the redistribution is a obligation mainly for the state. And so according to the political system in the state and according to political preferences in different societies, this may show that we have higher or lower social expenditure ratios. On the other hand, if we take a look at the Free Protestant variety of Protestantism, then we share also the Protestant work ethics, but we have also a very clear distinction between the deserving and the undeserving poor, and we have a much stronger emphasis on the individual to take care for his or her own fate. So we would expect in the Free Protestant case a much lower level of social expenditure than, for example, in the Roman Catholic case. When we come to the structure, in-kind versus cash benefits. Well, first of all, I have to say that if we give out welfare spending in cash, then that means that every individual can consume or devote the monetary resources according to his or her preferences. So in-kind welfare spending more or less overrules individual preferences. From the Roman Catholic variety, we would expect a negative impact on this structure, so they rely more on cash benefits than on in-kind benefits. There are several reasons for that. For example, the famous subsidiarity principle. Then, of course, the problem that the Roman Catholic Church is very anti-etastic. They are very skeptic concerning the state. There are other institutions that are relevant for overcoming poverty in society. And so we would expect a higher rate of cash benefits and a lower ratio of in-kind to cash benefits. In the established church's case, we would expect a higher rate of in-kind to cash benefits, mainly due to the fact that, again, it is, in the Lutheran understanding, the task of the state to provide social assistance and social care for society members. And there is this specific alliance between throne and altar. So it is mainly the task of the state to take care for the impoverished in society. And then finally, from the Free Protestant variant, our first initial guess was also that we would expect a higher in-kind to cash ratio. Why is this the case? The main idea in this case is poverty relief. We have specific we think that Protestants have a more positive view toward market allocation than, for example, the Roman Catholic variety. And there is this compassionate conservatism, which states that if we have a deserving impoverished person, and it is mainly the individual obligation to come out of this specific social situation, then it's maybe not so good an idea to give them cash benefits, especially if we do not know how they will allocate these monetary transfers. Maybe it's a better idea to give the transfers in kind. So this was our a priori expectation. I do not want to say it's a hypothesis that we formulate. It's more or less educated guessing, what we had here. So we wanted to take a closer look at the data, and I just want to skip through these coming slides. We have data on social expenditure ratio and in-kind and cash benefits ratios from the OECD, then some economic and demographic control variables that are mentioned here, and we also have political and religious control variables. For example, the question whether we have a majority voting system in a country or not, whether these countries are post-communist countries or not, and of course the religion, the main religion denomination, which we took from the Encyclopedia Britannica, and we said we speak of a Roman Catholic country if the majority of those who are engaged in a church is Roman Catholic, or whether a country, whenever a country had a state church or an established church, we speak of the Lutheran or the established church variety, and if there is a significant minority in Free Protestants, and a significant minority, we said 30% of society belongs to one of the Free Protestant churches, then we spoke of, or we put them in the Free Protestant variety. Now, I know whenever I put on this slide, there is a huge discussion whether we can really allocate country X to the variety Y. Please, we can do this in the discussion, but please just let me show you what we did and why we did this, and I will comment on the robustness of this application just in a second. So we have several countries that belong to the established churches variety: Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, and the UK. And if you have in mind the Esping-Andersen classification of welfare states, then you know that most of these countries belong to the so-called social democratic variety of welfare states. Then we have the Free Protestant states: Australia, Canada, Switzerland, Estonia, Netherlands, the United States, and New Zealand. And again, many of these countries belong, according to Esping-Andersen, to the liberal variety. And then we have a huge body of countries that are mainly shaped by the Roman Catholic tradition. So what we did was we made a regression with a specific technique, and we took the Roman Catholic variety as the base case. So all the regression coefficients that I will show you the difference between Free Protestants and established churches compared to the Roman Catholic base case. Okay? So if there are deviations, then it always says Protestants have more or have less compared to Roman Catholic countries. Here are the results, and I just want to briefly discuss the main results here. If we just make a regression without controlling for economic and political control variables, then the outcome is more or less what we would expect from Esping-Andersen. Free Protestant churches have a much lower social welfare spending. Established churches have a higher social welfare spending, always compared to the Roman Catholic variety. And this is more or less what Esping-Andersen says as well. Traditional social democratic welfare states have higher social welfare spending. Liberal welfare states have lower welfare spending. Now, the interesting thing is that the picture changes entirely whenever we control for the economic determinants and for political determinants as well. And as you can see, unfortunately, this coefficient here gets insignificant. It's significant, I think, on a 12% level or something like that. So statistically, it's insignificant, but the coefficient is more or less in the same range that we have here. But the interesting thing is that the sign for the established churches changes from the positive to the negative, and it even gets statistically significant when we control for economic and political variables. So we would argue, yes, both Protestant varieties have lower social welfare expenditure compared to what we would expect, given that, for example, in Sweden, we have a longer tradition of social democratic governments, etc., etc. Okay. How about the structure of welfare spending? First of all, we took a look at all programs, so health programs and old age security, etc., and then we took a closer look at two specific programs which are where you have a kind of ideological discourse concerning these two programs. This is especially family policy and labor market policy. So the question is, does these countries of a specific variety invest more money, invest more in cash than in kind than cash in these specific programs? And as we can see, both Free Protestant churches and the established churches, on average, they spend more in-kind transfers than cash transfers, always with respect to the Roman Catholic control. And this is mainly what we know from comparative welfare state research. This is sometimes called the so-called Roman Catholic cash bias. Roman Catholics tend more to invest in cash than in kind. However, if we take a closer look at specific programs, especially at family policy, then the picture changes as well. We have a very high in-cash bias, in-kind bias, I would rather say, in the established churches. Yeah? The Free Protestant variety does not differ too much from the Roman Catholic variety. And the same holds true for labor market policy. Again, this, in our understanding, has to do with the close connection between the religious denomination and the state in the established church case, and the distinction between the state and the religious institutions in the Roman Catholic case, but also, and maybe even stronger so, in the Free Protestant case. So one question was, how robust are these, is this allocation to this specific varieties that I mentioned before? And in order to check this, we did a specific test. We reran all our regressions, dropping just one country. So this shows us whether the coefficient is very responsive to including or excluding one specific country. And to make a long story short, with respect to the size of welfare spending, we only find one country, which is Great Britain, which is responsive, where the coefficient responds highly when we exclude Great Britain, but we would argue that we should take Great Britain to the established church variety. And with respect to the structure, to the in-kind versus cash benefit structure of the welfare state, we have, this is Chile. We have Chile, which has some impact on the coefficient, but elsewhere the coefficients stay rather stable, whether we include or exclude a specific country. So we would argue that the specification is rather robust concerning the inclusion or exclusion of specific countries to this variety. Okay, summing up, concluding, religious denominations show a lasting and also a significant impact on the size and the structure of the welfare state, and this holds also true although it is a fact that the impact and the influence of the churches has deteriorated in all these countries. We have a strong secularization in all of these countries, but the welfare state, the differences between the welfare state more or less stays the same. This influence remains, although the religious commitment of the population has decreased significantly. Catholic welfare state show a higher share of welfare expenditure compared to welfare states of the Protestant variety, both Free Protestant and Lutheran, and we take as an argument the Protestant work ethics that is essentially the same for these two approaches. And then established churches show a higher in-kind ratio in welfare spending compared to countries from the Roman Catholic and the Free Protestant cluster. So there is no Roman Catholic cash bias, but rather a established churches in-kind bias as to our findings. Then finally, some ideas for future research. Of course, we would like to extend our analysis first of all to other Christian denominations, especially to the Orthodoxy, but also to other non-Christian religions. But there is a huge data lack of data concerning this issue. And another topic that we would like to address in the future is a closer view on the impact of secularization on the welfare state. And I thank you for your attention.